only because I can't go over at the end because I obviously have somewhere else I need to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I have kind of three things I'd like to talk about, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions at the end. The last time I did something like this was after my trip to India, and I think I made it like a 10th of the way through the things that I had brought to share. I suspect that may very well be the case today, and that's okay. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the conference that I attended. I'm going to talk a little bit about the paper content that I presented. I'm not going to read the whole paper, but I'm going to try and give you just a brief summary. And then I'm going to share some pictures of our travels afterwards. So part of the reason I wanted to share about this is each year, each of the three pastors has a part of our professional growth budget that is allotted to professional growth activities. And so this, in 2025, my attendance going to this conference was a part of what I used that professional growth fund for. And just to be fully transparent, that fund paid for my registration at this conference and our housing just during the time we were at the conference. All of the rest of everywhere we went, getting there to and from, was all what we personally took care of. So just to give a sense of how that kind of works out. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity from the church and for the support. And I know a lot of people have been interested in hearing about it. Anyone in the room been to New Zealand? I'm just curious. I knew you had. Okay, I'm not surprised that you have.
I lived there.
Okay, that's right. I guess we did talk about that. So, so this is a map of New Zealand. I have another one that is just of the North Island that I'll bring up a couple of times because we were only on the North Island. And so the conference, just very briefly, the conference was here in New Plymouth. Auckland is kind of the main city on the North Island. That was where we flew in and out. Joe Hershey in this congregation is from just south of Auckland. So that's the area of New Zealand that she is from. And our travels then, we went through Hamilton. I have some pictures from Hamilton Gardens, which is phenomenal. We went directly to New Plymouth. And then afterwards, we traveled kind of this direction, a little bit this direction up into this peninsula and then back to Auckland. So this is what I saw. There's a lot to see in New Zealand, and we could not, we were there for 2 weeks total and I feel like we barely scratched the surface. And I think people had said that before we went, and I don't know that I really believed them, but now I do. So I'm going to kind of move through things. I've got watching the time, and I'm happy for more conversation, but at the moment, if I can kind of move through some of the things I want to share through my content of my paper, and then I'm happy to have conversation, questions and stuff, and show you some additional pictures. Okay, so that's what I just said. I'm going to talk about IPRA, the conference, I'm going to talk about my paper, and I'm going to talk about our trip. So kia ora is hello in Maori language, and so we heard that a lot. This is just the North Island. And so the South Island is down here. Australia is over here. Sydney is about a 3.25 hour flight to, it's further than you think. It's not like right next door from Sydney to get to Auckland. And that was how we went from Sydney direct to Auckland. And so New Plymouth, where we went first, is right down here, right on the coast. And so the conference that I was attending is the conference of the International Peace Research Association. I'm just not realizing it. I'll do my best without my notes. The title of the conference that was presented that caught my attention was Peace, Resistance, and Reconciliation. And I immediately started thinking about a paper that I had written in seminary where I was looking at the non-resistant position of the Church of the Brethren and how that has in many ways, in many spaces, translated to a non-violent resistant position in the denomination. And thinking a little bit about what did that shift, what was that shift, what did that look like, and where does that leave us now? Does that leave us disconnected with our non-resistant roots? Or has that been the frame, which is my argument, for where we are, I would say particularly in this congregation, as a non-violent resistant group? How does non-resistance turn into non-violent resistance? So that's kind of the bit of my paper. And I'm happy to share my paper because I'm not going to be able to go into the depth today, but that's available to you. So the organization that sponsored this conference is the International Peace Research Association. So that is an international global organization that is interested in highlighting research in the area of peace and conflict studies. They are a member of the International Social Science larger organization, so it's not just woo-woo, it's like grounded in methodologies and accepted standards for research in peace studies, which tends to be largely humanities-based or social science-based. There are subgroups regionally in the world. There is and I'm not going to remember all of the abbreviations, they have just a lot of letters. The African Peace Research Association, the Asian Pacific Peace Research Association, and this conference was co-sponsored by the International and by the Asia Pacific Organization. There's the European Peace Research Association, and then the one in the United States, and there's a Latin American Peace Research Association. And then the one in the United States is Peace and Justice Studies Association, PJSA. And they have conferences each year, and I attended that conference this year. I just went down for one day, was at Swarthmore. This coming year, in the fall, it's going to be at George Mason University, which is where I am doing my doctorate. So touching base and it's been at Notre Dame, at Kroc Institute, which are some of the big heavy hitting peace schools in the United States. I think it has also been at Manchester, which is one of the Church of the Brethren colleges that's particularly known for its peace program. So this is kind of the content, and that's a little bit about the organization. And I don't remember if I have other slides. I don't. Okay, so the very first thing that happened when we got to the conference was we went to this area. It's called a marae, M-A-R-A-E, and it is a community location where the local tribe hosts guests and also conducts various rituals and ceremonies. So weddings might be here, funerals, special meetings of the tribe. There are about 775 of them across the entire, both islands of New Zealand. This is the one that was closest to where our conference was being held in New Plymouth. And I don't remember what it says on the sign there but it's a marae. And so it's mostly these maraes usually have some type of carved ceremonial building. And so that was where we went first. In a couple of slides, there's a picture of the dining hall. I'm not going to remember without my notes, I'm not going to remember the Maori names for these buildings, but a lot of them start with WH, which is pronounced so far something. While we were there, and then between this building and the first picture I showed you, there's a large kind of open grass area. And the common part of the beginning of this ritual is the guests, the visitors enter. The tribal representatives come from this ceremonial building. You meet in the middle of this grass area, and then you continue to move towards this ceremonial building. In this particular situation, and I think traditionally, men or male identifying persons go first, women and female identifying persons come behind. We had some interesting conversations about that, but that was how we respectfully adhere to the practice that they do. They are singing. We also had a member of their tribe representative who was leading us, and they were singing back to each other in language I couldn't understand. And it was really a really special time. You come up here, you take your shoes off on this platform before you enter the space. I have no pictures of inside because pictures of inside are not an option. That's not something that you do. So this is the best picture that I had. And as you go in, there were two folks here, both from the tribe, and you do what's called hongi, which is a greeting with the nose. You may have seen this. And you literally walk up face to face, very intimate. And you touch your nose and you rub it a couple of times, holding each other's shoulders maybe, or holding an arm. And it's one of the most intimate, physically intimate things I've ever done with someone I had never met. And we did that twice. There were a few people, not very many, there were a few who felt really uncomfortable and did not participate in that. There also was a male and a female, and there were a few, particularly of women, who did it with the female, but not with the male. I did it with both, and it was a really neat moment. So if anyone ever asks you to do the hongi, I encourage you to give it a try. It's a little uncomfortable, but it was a fascinating moment. Then we went inside, and this whole ceremony has sort of like greeting and response, all in Maori. So I couldn't understand nothing of it. They gave us a little bit of an English summary at the end. And then they're giving like an argument for why these visitors should be accepted and welcomed into this place, into this town. And then there's a response. And I mean, this is like 20 minutes of not knowing what anyone is saying, while sitting kind of like, uncomfortably on the floor with my hip hurting as it was. And, but it was a really neat experience. We had tea, they sang songs. And so then this was the dining hall we went into, and part of our lunch was not hungi, but hangi, H-A, which is cooking the food in the ground, using hot rocks to roast root vegetables and meats. And then they had this buffet spread, and it was just amazing. But that's a traditional meal in New Zealand, at least in the North Island. You were on the South Island? Yeah. And so that's kind of neat. And I think there's variations of that in other cultural places around the world, but that was one of the experiences. This woman here named Kelly is from New Zealand, and she wears the head dress and occasionally jewelry that represents her tribal connection. One of the things that's really neat about this conference, which is held in different global locations every other year, is they really center themselves in the place that they are. So easily half or more of the people who were there were New Zealanders. Many of the others were Australians who were coming and participating. Some of that obviously is convenience of location, but also every time they began to talk, they greeted in Maori, then they translated in English. So really a prioritization of the land, recognizing the land that they were on, recognizing the culture that they were representing, identifying what tribe they were connected with. And so that was really valuable. And several of the sessions then were relating to Asian Pacific peace building work that they're doing in New Zealand. It was really fascinating. The thing that I presented on was not related to my doctoral research, but my doctoral research that I'm working on is relating to Church of the Brethren folks who have been involved in refugee resettlement in Lancaster County. And there was a person there who is from New Zealand, a student, grad student, and she is doing her doctoral work on refugee resettlement in New Zealand. So it was really interesting to go to the presentation and hear some of the things that are similar and quite different about the angle that she was taking as she was presenting that activity as it's playing out in New Zealand. So just highlights of a couple of the sessions that I attended. This was a group of folks, and again, because I don't have my notes, I can't remember their names. Matt Meyer is just completed his term as one of the 2 general secretaries of IPRA, of this whole international organization. He is from, I kind of think he's from the Swarthmore area, but I'm not 100%. Anyway, he's from the United States. This gentleman was from French Polynesia. She was from Australia, and Emily Welty is also from the United States, from New York. The 3 of them were part of the reception of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 that was awarded to, and it's in my notes, let's see if I remember it, the nuclear disarmament, the international, anyway, a nuclear disarmament organization. I know it and I can't think of it. And one of the things they were talking about in their presentation that was fascinating was receiving an award for work that is not complete, and wrestling with how do we, and I think this is a question for us, right? In this time, in religion, how do we personally and communally celebrate, find movement in work that's never done? And so a lot of what they were sharing centered around concepts of hope, concepts of some things that connected in with some of what I found in my paper as well. Anyway, so that was one session that I went to. That was really neat. I went to another session, and I want to share these slides with the racial justice group, because there are some books here that might be useful in our social justice library. That was what I thought when I was at this session. There was a presentation around books for kids that are relating to peace and justice. And so I just took some pictures of some of the slides of books that are currently out there that are new or recent that are relating to conflict and peace building from around the world. And so they were sharing a little bit about that, and I thought that that was valuable and interesting, and I will pass those along. There was a dance performance by a group called Reborn, R-E:\B-O-R-N. It's a dance initiative. They're founded in California, Southern California, Santa Ana, and they came and did a phenomenal interactive dance performance, wrestling with visibly playing out what warfare looks like and responses to it. It was very difficult to watch, to be quite honest. There were people in tears afterwards. We all sat around the room, and at the beginning, they came out and they each took on a role, like one was mother, one was father, one was sister, one was brother, one was friend. And then, so they have this persona, then they move into what might seem to be an unrelated kind of warfare scene, except you're still seeing them as the person that they initially represented, as a mother, as a father, as a brother. It was powerful. This was the only photo that I took, but it was very engaging. And I got it. Baroka is the main person that leads this group, and got a chance to talk with her at the end. And then the last thing that I wanted to share as far as the things that I attended, and again, I'm not remembering her name. I think it's Malika, but I could be wrong. She is Palestinian. She's from the Gaza Strip. She's currently working, teaching in Scotland in a peace program there. I think that the video of her presentation is available on YouTube, and I would be happy to share. And I was hoping I was going to get a chance to watch it again, and I just haven't had a chance. So I will tell you what I remember. Which is, she shared her story of how she was selected barely to come out of Gaza and go to grad school. But more poignantly than that, she shared about, as a person in the circles that she's in, she's often hearing people tell her, oh, you're so resilient. You know, we're so proud of your resilience. And her response, at least internally, and she started writing a little bit about this, is, what can we address the things which have caused me to need to be resilient? And that was really, I found that to be a really personally confrontational question. Why do I need to be resilient? What are the things we need to address so that I don't have to be resilient? So that's very micro. She talked for like 20 minutes. So she said more than that, but that was my takeaway. Really powerful speaker. That was on the final morning of the conference. So I presented that was on Saturday. I presented on Friday, and I was really glad I did, because I didn't really get much of a chance to work on my presentation until I got there. Had just too many other things I was juggling. So one of the things I needed to do in that context that I did not need to do in my original paper, which, as I mentioned, I wrote during seminary, and I was tweaking a little bit for this session, was identify who the Church of the Brethren is. And this became particularly tricky because I needed to say who the Church of the Brethren is not. One of which is the Plymouth Brethren, or exclusive Brethren. So this is actually, the Plymouth Brethren is a small sectarian group that is founded and located in New Zealand and Australia. I don't know, those of you who are connected with Church of the Brethren kind of denominational stuff, a few years ago, there was another organization. There was some conflict about the website name, and this is that other organization. They are theologically not connected to our Schwarzenau heritage. Interestingly, and this is a whole nother presentation, interestingly, there are some theological areas of overlap, but they have positioned themselves in this area of the world as very exclusive and not very well received. And I'll just leave it at that. But people do not look at those groups favorably. So I needed to identify that that's not who I was talking about. That's not the group that I name that I'm a part of the group I'm talking about. That's not who we are. There are some other words in New Zealand, in the town we were in. There's an open Christian congregation that I needed to identify. This is not who the Church of the Brethren is. The heritage is not the same. Similar language, but not any of those. So these are all common names for this group in New Zealand. And then just other names that persons from the West, from the US would know that we were not, because I could name on 3 fingers the number of people who knew who the Church of the Brethren was. And they were mostly Quakers. There were not a lot of Quakers there, Australian Quakers. And they knew of the Church of the Brethren from the historic Peace Church context, but they didn't know really anything else about. And they thought we were connected with some of these groups, that we were not that. And also I felt like it was important to say that we were not a bunch of men, which I think was self-evident, but I felt the need to say it because when you hear that out of context for folks who have never heard of the Brethren, the Church of the Brethren, it sounds like, oh, it's a group of brothers. And there's some lovely brothers. And there are also some lovely sisters and others. And so I needed to state that. So I spent more time with that in my presentation than I expected. I'll just give you kind of a brief summary, a little bit of a thesis of what my paper sort of was talking about. I introed it a couple of minutes ago, and I'll sort of name that again. Kind of this question that I was wrestling with about the shift from a brethren understanding heritage of non-resistance. And so part of my presentation was tracing where that appears in scripture. Obviously, we see that in Matthew, of not being violent, not responding with violence. We see that in the Schleitheim Confession and other foundational Anabaptist writings. And so the Schleitheim Confession is from 15 something something, and this sort of this statement of seven items, one of which is, this is what happens when I go off script. I have it in my paper, but I'm trying not to read from my paper. Thereby shall also fall away from us the diabolical weapons of violence, such as sword, armor, and the like, and all of their use to protect friends against enemies. By virtue of the word Christ, you shall not resist evil, from Matthew 15:27. That's the Schleitheim Confession. That's the one of the things that pertains most clearly. Because we also are informed by radical pietism, I note Christian Hoberg, Andreas Boni, and some other authors, Hochmann von Hockenau, who are writing in their early pietist teachings about rejecting Christian participation in war. In Boni, the true Christian must be prepared to suffer injustice rather than himself take an active part in it. And then affiliation with the Mennonites, which were also non-resistant early in their heritage, theologically and practically. The Brethren were also affected by the history of warfare in Germany, out of which they came. And so after the 30 Years' War and the violence and the death and the disease, and not wanting to engage in that way again. So a number of foundations that lead to this non-resistant principle for the early Brethren in 1708, when those first 8 are baptizing each other in the river, in the Ada River at Schwarzenau. And so Donald Dernball, who is kind of, I would say, the preeminent Church of the Brethren historian, one of them, sums up that the source of this non-resistant principle, quote, was from a combination of their theological convictions and life experiences that the Brethren, from their inception as a movement, held to a consistent peace testimony. And then I trace in my paper a number of more recent authors, including David Eller, who's a member of this congregation, Carl Bowman, who's a sociologist, but has done work in this area, practically looking at how the Brethren, particularly as compared to the Mennonites, have engaged or not in going to war. And some interesting things come out of that. Dale Stauffer, more Donald Dernball. I included some writings from Mark Ray, who is with the Brethren Revival Fellowship, because I think it's important to see the perspectives of a variety of political viewpoints when kind of looking at an issue. And there are a number of reasons why people give about this shift. Nate Hostler, who's written more recently, and some of that being related to, well, the Brethren discovered that in addition to being non-resistant and anti-violence and anti-warfare, they also wanted to do good things. They wanted to be charitable, and that being part of the movement now into engagement outside their community, which was a very sectarian, insulated community. And then you start and critique about wanting to look more Protestant, particularly in the 20th century, that was part of the movement out of this historic theologic non-resistant position. And when you start engaging with folks outside your circle, what does that do to the circle? So for me, just conceptually, I think this just raises interesting questions, and some of this is what I'm dancing around in my PhD as well. How does the actual identity of a group start to change that group? So for example, a group that is formed around the basis of obedience to Jesus and the community that says this is how we're going to be, well, that suddenly starts requiring you to step outside the group. And then that community that's been formed, that insular sectarian community, now we need to talk about what it means to be inclusive or open in some ways. And that starts pushing back against some of the tenets of the original community. So I just think there's some interesting, conceptually interesting things about how identity shapes and changes identity. A little meta, but so anyway, where I land in my paper is essentially that Dernbaugh's statement that I read a couple of minutes ago. I think that that's still true. And I think that's why there's been this shift from strict non-resistance, non-engagement to a more non-violent engagement, resistance, but not violent, which is, again, to repeat, kind of his quote, that the roots of the original Brethren non-resistant principle, which we see playing out in resistance like baptizing each other in a river, which was not, that was a resistant act. That is playing out, that can be repeated with new additional life experiences that inform this group. And the consistent peace testimony may be more varied than it once was because the group has grown and shifted and the context in which we live and exist has grown and shifted. And so I think it's still true that from a combination of theological convictions and life experiences, the Brethren from their inception to now and continuing held to a consistent peace testimony. But it looks a little different now than it did. Mm-hmm.
Don't we also owe so much of this transition to the civil rights movement?
Sure.
Because I mean, it was Black people that taught us how to do democracy.
Sure. Oh, that would be a whole nother excellent paper. Yeah. I gave you like the cliff notes of the cliff notes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did read recently somewhere, I don't know if it's a messenger or a Sunday school class or something, that the actual term "do not resist the evildoer," when you look at that word, it's very limited. That it's always in the context of war.
Yeah.
That is not Hebrew or biblical. Do not resist as you would against an enemy.
Right.
So do not resist violently, which doesn't mean don't resist, because Jesus resisted all of them.
Right.
That was his thing. He resisted, but he didn't do it violently.
Yeah. And I think, so where this paper started for me was a Facebook post in the Church of the Brethren Friends group, which some of you may be familiar with. It's gotten a little less friendly, but several years ago it was a little more friendly. Believe it or not, sometimes brethren don't agree. And someone made a post, and I go into it in my paper about non-resistance, because one of the shifts has been, for those who still adamantly hold to this non-resistant position, it's been a non-engagement position, way more than just in war. It's become sort of non-engagement with the world, which is rooted in the two kingdoms theology. And so there's valid reason for that to have gone that direction. And to be honest, I mean, I've had conversation. Karen Garrett is a friend of mine. She works at the Brethren Heritage Center in Ohio, and I know her from seminary days. And she would say, I'll bring her voice into this conversation. Not all the brethren would say they're nonviolent, resistant. They would say they're non-resistant. Like what I'm positing would not be agreed upon amongst all brethren, which is part of the gift and the challenge. And so then it just, for me, it always goes back to that. Then what holds us together? And so to trace this root, I think non-resistance still holds us together, but it is manifest in different forms. It'd be a very simple way, I would say. So let me share a few more things, and then I think hopefully I'm doing okay on time. I was able to abbreviate that faster than I thought I could. But I'm happy for more conversation around that. I want to show you a little bit about a couple more things from the conference, and then a little bit about our travels. I don't want this to be a travel slideshow, but some folks have asked, so I want to honor that. This is inside the place that we stayed in New Plymouth. Mark is taking the picture, so he's not in it. 24, you may recall, I went to the International Education Peace Educators Conference in Nepal, and these three amazing people were there, and then I was able to reconnect with them. in New Zealand at this conference. Daniela is German, and she has done some significant work with FOR, Fellowship of Reconciliation, and love her dearly. Hakeem is from Trinidad and Tobago originally. He is currently teaching at Gettysburg College, and he also connects into New York City. And Rajib is from Kathmandu, so he was one of the coordinators of the conference that I went to in Nepal. He was just elected at this conference as one of the new Secretary Generals of the IPRA. And he does a lot of work in Nepal, particularly with peace building and conflict resolution in schools with children and youth. And he went from this conference to a conference in Australia, and then I think he was going to something in Kenya. I mean, and he's just, but such a rich group of people, and this is there were about 200 people at the conference. So honestly, the fact that I did not like my presentation. I veered a bit away from my paper. I overthunk it, and I would do it totally differently now. So I felt kind of crappy, to be honest, after my presentation. I didn't feel good. There's a lot scholarly get in your head of, I don't know anything I'm talking about anymore. And I don't know, I struggle with that anyway, a little bit of imposter syndrome. So I wish I had just stuck with my paper as I had originally written it, because it was better than what I did at the conference. But I also would usually rather go to a conference and just listen to everybody else and not necessarily, I don't mind presenting, but I do a lot of talking. I like to listen. So really wonderful connections, reconnecting with some folks that I was so grateful to have the chance to reconnect with, and then making some new connections as well. So now we'll go a little bit into the travels. As I mentioned, we were only on the North Island. So at this point, we are here. We flew into Auckland and we drove down. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We drove down through Hamilton, and then we drove along this coastal road here into New Plymouth. I'm just going to go through these very quickly. The Hamilton Gardens are phenomenal. So I have a few pictures of the Hamilton Gardens. And of course, it was November here and it was spring there, and it was just lush. And the Hamilton Gardens have all these different areas that represent different nationalities and cultural traditions. Oh, that's a blank slide. Oh no, this is not a blank slide. I forgot I did this little animation. So there was like a bamboo forest, and then this was a more Maori related garden. And it was just, this one was there's like a little Egyptian kind of dog here at the end of this. Can't always see very well shadow. And then we continued down that coastal road, and we stopped at this place, which is called the Three Sisters, because of the rock formations that are there. We had to kind of hike about a half mile to a mile around. We parked way on the other side of this thing. It was mushy. I didn't put the picture in of our muddy feet. There was another couple doing the same thing. They decided to go back by a different route. Unlike the Magi, they were less successful and got stuck in mud up to their torso. Mark had to put a stick in to help pull them out. I mean, it was a whole thing. I saw the cell phone in her pocket and I thought, oh no. So I hope that they made it back. This was the place that we stayed in New Plymouth. This man, found this place on booking.com. It was a little one bedroom kind of apartment. It was built on the side of their house. And there's other houses right there. And he called it Little Chapel Bay. He built it himself kind of by hand. Really neat kind of hippie Australian couple, if there is such a thing, that are now living in New Zealand. There was a record player and all these records. There's a park in town, and it's in my notes and I can't see my notes. Anyway, that we went to the fernery, had some conservatory buildings, and then there was this lake with the bridge, just really beautiful stuff. That was right in New Zealand. That's one of the things to do. There's a coastal walkway along the water, and really fascinating. Just the way that the New Zealand folks honor their traditions and their history is really beautiful. And this was in town. We walked a little bit around in town. We went to this museum and walked a bit through New Zealand history, which was fascinating. Yeah.
The rainbow was an LGBTQ thing, or what was that?
It was just one of the crosswalks.
So, but
it wasn't advertised as anything, but I took it. They weren't all like this, but yeah, it felt like an open and affirming space. Yeah. And of course, everything's on in my mind, other side of the road. So you're driving on the left, you're sitting on the right, the driver's on the right side of the car. Mark and I always was reaching for the seatbelt on the wrong side, because if you're sitting down to drive, you expect it to be one place and then not. So great museum. This was the beach right in front of our little house was right here, and we had actually an open view to the beach. And then this in the distance is Mount Taranaki, which is this kind of cone-shaped mountain that just rises from the middle of that kind of kick out on the map. And so we could see it from here. And then we also, the very last thing we did as we were leaving New Zealand was we went to this bridge. Again, sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but it's built specifically so that you can see the mountain through from that particular angle through the bridge. And that was pretty cool. Like we had to wait in line to get that picture. And there weren't that many people there, but that's what everyone was going there to see. So that was down here. And this is Mount Taranaki right here, this little circle kind of in the center. So we could see it from a couple different angles. Our plan was to then go down here to the coast and drive. And we had a reservation the next day over in, can't read it on there anyway, this national park, Tongariro National Park. We had a place reserved for 2 nights, and we had a booking for a full day hike, alpine hike from peak to peak. You can do it yourself. We decided to have a guide just because then you hear a little bit more about the interesting stuff. And so that was our plan. And the morning that we were to leave New Plymouth, I walked out and Mark said, "Did you see the news?" And I was like, "No." And there was a wildfire in Tongariro National Park. And so we were then immediately kind of getting on email. Are we still having this hike? Like, what is happening? And no, the hike was canceled. The park was closed starting that day for about 3 or 4 weeks following. So it took a little bit of work, but I was able to get ourselves out of our reservation there, and we redirected and went up to a place we weren't planning to go, which is Lake Taupo, which is this lake right here. So instead of going this way, we went this way across what's called the Forgotten World Highway. And it was just beautiful. There's a lot of this terracing is very common. I just was really surprised at the amount of agriculture that exists. A lot of dairy, their cheese and milk is really prominent. And also just the simple reality that if you go in the stores, most of the products you're going to find are made in New Zealand. I mean, the difficulty in getting things from other places in the world is real. And so they figure out they do it themselves, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so this Forgotten World Highway took us through this little hobbit hole, and this is actually a 2-lane road. Yeah, no, yeah, a little bit gripping the steering wheel. We both did some driving. At one point, we stopped at a lookout, and this was the smoke coming from the wildfire. So that's where we were planning to be. And by this point, it had drifted across, and there were actually 2 guys that were working with like the National Forestry Organization that had stopped as well. They were on their way to it. And so we were chatting with them a little bit on the top of this lookout. So then we got to Lake Taupo, and it's just this beautiful lake. I don't remember exactly how big it is, other than it's compared to the size of Singapore. I'm pretty sure it's what they said, is how big this lake is. So it's pretty large. We took a boat tour. This is the town kind of behind us. And this boat tour takes you to a modern, this is not an ancient carving, a modern artist's carving in the rock. And there's more here on the side that I didn't include a picture to here, but I can, if you're interested, alligator and maybe a lion, I don't remember. And the only way to get there is by boat. You can't see this from any land. So that was pretty cool. We stopped at a glass blower and glass sculpture garden, which was neat. The weather was back and forth, as you can kind of see from some of the pictures. I'm wearing a rain jacket in that one. This is Huka Falls. Massive, it's hard to see from this picture, just massive amounts of water. You can see it a little bit better from there, perhaps. This is down here. So there's just water coming from the surrounding mountains and kind of all channeling into this area. It's a popular tourist place to go see.
So it's normally like that?
Yes, that amount of water.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that was something I had asked about at one point. I mean, this lush and greenness is kind of all year round on the North Island. It's not always as warm as it was when we were there, and we probably had temperatures anywhere from low 60s to mid 70s. It was very comfortable, particularly knowing what was going on here. temperatures here, but never, and we were there was rain, and it's the kind of place that it might rain for an hour in the afternoon, and then the sun comes out 2 hours later. A very tropical feel, very lush all year round. They don't get snow on the mainland. Up in the mountains, they definitely do. And there was snow on the top of Mount Taranaki still, so there's places
I'm
that.
just impressed that that bridge is still there.
Yeah. It doesn't come as close, so it doesn't come up high to the bridge. Yeah, but it's just a massive amount of water. It reminded me of Niagara Falls. I mean, it was that kind of content. Not as big though, in a much smaller compact space. So from Lake Taupo, then we went up to Rotorua, which is known as a geothermal, pardon the pun, hotspot. And so we went to this thermal park, which is often, we have not been to Yellowstone yet. I know some of you have, so it's compared to kind of the Yellowstone of New Zealand, the Yellowstone of the Asia Pacific. So that was some of the things we saw there. This was the first place we stayed there, which was in a tiny house up on the top ridge, looking over the Lake Rotorua, which is in the caldera of what used to be a volcano. Fairly recently in geologic terms, but a while ago. We weren't worried about it exploding while we were there. Beautiful views. There were some alpacas on that property. We went zip lining, and I took a lot of pictures of ferns, a lot of ferns. We went to see the kiwi hatchery. The kiwi is an endemic bird, a native bird. And one of the most interesting, so I have some pictures we saw little baby birds through the glass. You can't hold them, we'll point about that, but a really neat bird. They are trying to rehabilitate them because only one mammal is native to New Zealand. Only one mammal. Can you guess what it is? What's that?
No, I'm
Oh,
repeating.
Koala.
no, Australia.
Australia.
No.
No.
A flying mammal.
Yeah.
Bat. One species of bat is native to New Zealand, or one family of species of bats. All the other mammals that have come to New Zealand have been introduced from other people who have come to New Zealand. So the native kiwi bird has been at risk for decades because of the introduction of stoats, which are like weasel kind of animals, rats, pets, cats and dogs. There's a possum, not opossum, possum, different. We saw some dead ones on the sides of cliffs, similarly to opossums. So they are needing to raise them to a certain size where they will be able to successfully thrive when they are put back into their natural habitat. So that's what the hatchery does. There's a couple different ones around. I thought that was really interesting. The weather was cruddy. The second day that we were in Rotorua, we went to a cultural show, and we did a similar, that ceremony that I described to you that we did when we arrived in New Plymouth. We did sort of a tourist version of it. I was really glad that I got to experience a more authentic version of it initially, but we did kind of a tourist version of it in pouring rain. The cultural show was great. We had an awesome dinner, and then we went back to our tiny house, and the wind was gusting a lot, enough that I was not sure. I'm sure the tiny house is still there, but I decided we were not going to stay to find out. And so we ended up bailing and went down to a hotel that second night in the town. And I felt much safer and I could sleep. I would not have been able to sleep given the conditions that we were experiencing on the top of that hillside. And then from Rotorua, we drove, we were supposed to go up, this is the Coromandel Peninsula. We were supposed to go up to this side where there's some pretty cool things to see, one of which is called Cathedral Cove. It's this interesting rock formation. We had a kayak tour booked. The weather that I mentioned the day before had come through that area very strongly, and they canceled our tour because the tide was too high. And so we decided to bail on going that way, and instead we went this way up the Coromandel, on the coast of the Coromandel Peninsula, and I was so glad we did because it was beautiful. And we also stumbled upon this place called Rotorua Water Gardens, and the pictures don't do a thing. I don't think I even included it anymore because they don't do it justice. It was beautiful. Just was magical. There's a family. It's a privately owned place. But you can go all around their gardens. They're actually selling it right now. So if I run into $2 million, I will probably be moving to New Zealand and owning this garden and hiring a gardener. There was a hike that you can do up to this waterfall thing, and it was just very, very cool, very, very neat place. I was really glad that we got to go there, and we wouldn't have if we'd gone the other way. And so then we continued driving up the coast, and this was some of the kind of the view, the coastal view. So you sort of see this mix between the remnants of the kind of more agricultural looking land bumping up against these rocky shores, and the colors reminded me of Maine, very blue, that blue and that green contrast. This was where we stayed in Coromandel. We had this, I felt like we were living in the forest. It was just this amazing view. We could kind of see the water off in the distance. Had a beautiful sunset the first night. The weather the second day was not as great. The drive there included water crossing. And we were in this teeny tiny car that scraped the road everywhere we went. It was very embarrassing. I would reserve a different car next time. We went to this place called Driving Creek, which is this man in the 60s bought this property, wanted to reforest it. There's a lot of reforestation happening because there had been a lot of deforestation to use those resources with we know in other places in the world as well. So there's really some, over the last several decades, been strong attempts to reforest and make homes for the kiwi bird and other native animals and birds, particularly birds. So this guy built this train track for the purpose of fetching clay that was up in the mountains. So there's a pottery. I got this mug there. It's still a pottery haven. But then discovered other people wanted to ride his train tracks. And so then he built this train. And now it's a tourist attraction. You go and you ride the train and just phenomenal views. This is out the side. That's Mark's head out the side of the train. I mean, again, kind of indescribable, really beautiful. They also have like a little nature area. And so we walked around in that, and there's it's very artsy, kind of art meets nature place. Mining also is something that was big. We didn't spend a lot of time with that, but there are places where you can go to learn about the gold mines that existed in this area. So they had this one little mine. It goes about, I don't know, 12 feet in. So we went in, and then we saw these, and we went right back out. This is the weta, which is a large cricket spider situation. Large hand size. We didn't know they were there. We saw them on the sign. We're like, oh, maybe we'll see one of those. And we look up and they're like all over the ceiling. It's great. We'll head back out now. Again, just different kind of coastal views. This was just sort of a random assortment of things the last couple of days. Still in the Coromandel Peninsula, the Kari tree is also really significant, and they're massive. So this is Mark with his arms. Big, tall trees, and just the tree. This is another one. Just the trees in general, I found very intriguing. A fern, little head, big. This isn't a little fern. This is like a gigantic fern. I don't know how to describe it. Okay, wow, I got through all my pictures.
Need to make it to 50 for a date, no?
Yeah, I'd be open to that. Yeah, it's actually closer to Hawaii than anywhere else in the US. Yeah.
You had a slide that explained what the Church of the Brethren is not.
Mm-hmm.
What did you tell them we were?
Yeah. So I talk a little bit about, in my paper and in my presentation, I talk a little bit about, I mean, to an audience that does not know what Anabaptism and radical pietism mean, but many of them do know the historical reference to the Reformation and to kind of, so I usually, as I describe to my students, I usually describe the Church of the Brethren as one of the groups that emerged from the radical pietist movement, which was pushing back against Protestantism, which was pushing back against the Catholic Church and reframing faith. When I think about kind of what the tenets are that I usually identify, a lived faith, non-creedal, non-doctrinal, with the New Testament as the foundation and obedience to Jesus' teachings as the pivotal kind of focus point. So I usually try to give it both a historical situated historically as well as theologically. The reality is, for some, particularly those coming from a more sacramental Catholic kind of understanding, that's difficult to understand. But if nothing else, it sort of plants the seed of like, this is different. Service, I often talk about service and humility, again, as an outcropping of that obedience to Jesus. So those are sort of the things that would probably be the way I would describe. That's choppy. I would write it out better than that, but yeah.
I think in World War II, soldiers that came from New Zealand were referred to as Kiwis.
Yeah, the people are
They
referred
still
to
are.
Kiwis, yeah.
Yeah.
The people, the bird, and, well, I mean, there's the fruit, but don't see a lot of that there. I mean, that there may be, I don't know. I didn't see kiwi trees, but yeah. But yeah, the people refer to them as themselves as Kiwis as well.
Hey, how would you describe New Plymouth? We have a friend that lives there
Yeah.
from our Vietnamese time,
Mm-hmm.
who's back taking care of her parents now on the farm, and she was telling us all about. And then now I've seen your pictures. Now it's coming to light,
Yeah,
some of her stories. But we'd like to go visit.
yeah.
But is it like a city or?
It is, yeah, it's a mid-size city.
Okay.
You go through a lot of rural to get there, no matter which way you go. Because it's really geographically kind of down on that southwestern side. And it's not quite as, I mean, that Mount Taranaki, you can see it almost everywhere you are, but New Plymouth itself and the surrounding towns are fairly coastal. And
So
there's some
flat.
industrial stuff happening there. It is kind of an up and coming as far as the tourism is concerned. It's not a place that a lot of tourists have on their radar. So it's not, I mean,
Where do
certainly
you fly into?
Auckland.
Auckland.
There is a little airport in New Plymouth,
Okay.
but we drove. I mean, I think that Mark and my travel style, we like a scenic drive. We like to see how you get from one place to another, and you miss some of that when you fly solely. We like a good garden, nice hike.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think New Plymouth, the center of Maori sort of cultural stuff is more up in the Rotorua area where we went to the cultural show, but it's still very present. I mean, I sort of had the perception from what I had read that we were not going to really see that in New Plymouth. It's very present in New Plymouth in the people. It's not present touristically in New Plymouth, but it's very, I also realized I had some experiences that most people going would not. Most people would not have the opportunity to go to that marae and be welcomed by the tribe unless you're there as part of a group.
Yeah, when I was living in Vietnam, we had a whole bunch of Kiwis and Aussies that ran all the dive shops, and I ran into in my travels that year that we lived there. And all the men had these massive Maori tattoos.
A lot of tattoos.
And
Women
I mean,
too.
massive
Yes,
tattoos.
yes.
Did you see a lot of that?
Yes, a lot of that. And they're beautiful. So
Oh,
that
they're
kind of like,
Very artistic.
yeah, like that inset kind of
Yeah.
almost design, almost like a
But-
fleur de
But
lis.
there's so much ink, I just was amazed.
Yeah, a lot. And I don't know, I find it somewhat interesting. That's not necessarily common to Asia Pacific. So you go up to Japan, you are not going to see tattoos because the Japanese actually, it's culturally, what's that? Taboo. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
no,
what I'm
no,
looking
yeah.
for. So it's not necessarily a Asia Pacific thing. For them, it's Maori connected. Now, I also saw a number of, and this is something that was named multiple times at my conference, which again, if I had not been there for the reason I was there, I might not have noticed. But there were definite acknowledgments from New Zealanders who are not connected with the Maori tribe. They don't try to pretend they are, which I thought was really valuable. They're not going to have the tattoos. It's pretty much connected with folks who have Maori connections, which is a lot of the population, but there are a number of folks who are there that are New Zealanders, but not Maori, whose ancestors are what the Maori would understand to be settlers and colonializers. And so that tension exists there as it does in many other places. They have done some really good work with trying to create opportunities for conversations about that tension. In fact, not very long ago, I want to say within the last couple of years, there was a Maori group that presented like a reparations statement to the New Zealand Parliament in an attempt to bring some of that, equalize some of that. And it was fairly well received. Most of it, my memory from what they described, my understanding is most of it was adopted. There were some language changes, but they are that whole nation is continuing to work towards acknowledging harm that was done, and moving forward together without losing the heritage that exists. And the heritage is not singular. I think that that's a really important piece.
I was gonna ask, what is the primary focus for peacemaking for them?
Mm.
Is that it?
That's definitely a piece of it, for sure, because the Maori folks were very dangerously close to losing that heritage. The language was starting to disappear, like they've been intentional about maintaining the language, prioritizing it.
Native American.
Sure, sure, yes,
Big
yes.
language.
Just the population is larger there, so there's a larger voice, which I think is probably an important piece. But then the question I think is how to do that. And I would say the same, interestingly, in a different way about the Church of the Brethren, how to do that in a way that keeps the heritage alive, but doesn't inappropriately lay it over top of contemporary dynamics. You know what I mean? I don't know how to express that quite, but valuing the heritage, continuing to recognize it, but also acknowledging that it's a new people now and will be a new people in the next generation. And how do we continue to carry that and hold it in ways that are valuable and helpful and not harmful from either direction?
I had a friend who I met in Northern Ireland, but she was born in Rhodesia, which is turned into Zimbabwe. Her folks moved from Scotland to Rhodesia to start a farm. It didn't work. They moved to Scotland. And then when she became of age, she moved to Australia for about 8 years. And then she moved back to Scotland. And then Northern Ireland, where I met her, she was there for about 4 or 5 years, but then she moved to Scotland. And then just 2 years ago, she moved to New Zealand. But it's, again, even the Scottish people didn't get there till the 1700s.
Right, right. It's a very young,
Very young.
country.
Yeah.
Um,
And they
yeah.
Produce sheep. And
Yes.
that was their biggest
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I can see that for
Mutton
sure.
and sheep.
Lot
And
of,
that
a lot
was
of cattle.
their population. Of course, you deforest.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too, because as I was doing research for our travels, finding out that this is a popular place that Americans are interested in moving to. You know, so it's a language that is familiar, even though there's an accent. But I'm not sure New Zealand's super open to that. And in fact, they've recently increased the amount that tourists need to pay to go, mostly related to conservation. So when you go to New Zealand, I think it's like about $100 a person that you pay, and that money is routed into preservation and conservation. There's a lot of efforts. I mean, I think the peace building question that you asked, I think the other piece there's environmental peace building, and that's a very real thing. That's a fairly new subfield coming into the peace and conflict studies arena. But how do we interact in peaceful ways with all of creation? And so that is work that they are doing. I think that's what was most clear in our Kiwi bird kind of learnings. But thinking about too the role of, and so this is a culture that the land is really important. There is nowhere else to go if something happens to that land. And I don't want to say humanization, but the spiritualization of the tree and the bird and the flower and the roots. A lot of the tattoos, a lot of the imagery is floral or tree and root or fern imagery. So that's really a focal.
Certainly have a spirit of life.
For sure, yeah.
You had said, you mentioned about, you're part of a group, but then that, unless you described it, but I was wondering if there's audio books or an author or somebody that speaks about that, that being part of this group, that your belief system makes you venture out into different, is there anything that you could recommend?
It's kind of theoretical stuff I'm playing with in my mind.
Oh,
Okay. So yeah,
you're gonna
there
write
probably is. I don't think I'm the first person to take such a thought.
thought that
Yeah.
was interesting, and I'd
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
hear about that more.
I mean, some of the areas that I'm exploring for my research that kind of touch on that is social identity and group identity and religious identity, and how individuals affiliate with and identify with a group. And then what are the dynamics in that group? I mean, and we see that playing out in other ways politically in the United States right now. And I think I maybe mentioned this to you in another communication we had, but as folks become more and more, their identification with the group becomes stronger, their individual identity starts to become less salient, starts to become less palpable, less strong. And that is one of the dangers of political group orientation, is we can, but not only political group orientation, we can become so clearly identifying with our group that we lose track of the humanity of people in other groups. So social identity is a piece of what I've looked at.
Well, if you
But
come across it,
yeah,
send it my way.
for
I'd be
sure, for
interested.
sure. Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna need to, it's 18 after, so I'm gonna need to close for all of our purposes. Thank you so much. I'm always happy for more conversation. Thanks.